ladies and gentlemen. The year was 1993, and I was a mere 4 years old. That would be the year that I would be introduced into gaming by my grandfather, and the very first game that I would play would be Wolfenstein 3D. Back in the early 90s, that game blew many a gaming enthusiast away with its amazing graphics and extraordinarily fun gameplay. But it has definitely aged over the years. When I went back to it a couple months ago, I just could not play it. I found it to be annoyingly difficult, and the controls were rather clunky. But thankfully, some enterprising modders have swooped in and have updated Wolfenstein 3D for the 21st century. So with that, let's fire up GZ Doom and take a look at it. This is Brutal Wolfenstein version 4.5, waiting for 5.0. Not the most imaginative of titles, but it gets the point across. This is a remastered version of Brutal Wolfenstein version 4.5, but not having played base version 4.5, I cannot really tell you what the changes are. To play this mod, you will need either Doom 2 or Free Doom 2, as this is a Doom 2 modification. Now, this is not the first Wolfenstein mod to use GZ Doom, as there is an older mod that simply ports Wolfenstein 3D into the Doom 2 engine, and you can see some footage of that particular mod in my Doom Mega review. Brutal Wolf actually flew under my mod door for a bit until it was recommended to me by a number of fans, but due to time constraints I have just now been able to get to it, and it was certainly worth the wait. If Brutal Doom was an enhancement to regular Doom, then Brutal Wolfenstein upgrades Wolf 3D like that liquid metal bath did Arnold in T5. Old, but no longer obsolete. Oops. Spoiler alert! Brutal Wolfenstein fixes every single aspect of Wolfenstein 3D that actually is aged poorly, and turns Wolfenstein 3D into a game that can still hold its own with later Wolfenstein titles. First and foremost, you have the modern controls that GZ Doom brings to the table. Trying to play Wolf 3D with 10 controls was not quite as fun as I remembered. Next, all the guns now hit what you aim at, meaning you cannot just fire in an enemy's general direction and expect to hit. The weapon models have all been modified with higher detail ones. Back in the day, the Luger was just a black mass of pixels. Now it looks like a real bloody gun. And like in Brutal Doom, you can reload your weapons. And the Mighty Boot shows up, but this time it's not simply a Duke Nukem 3D reference. Rather, it's keeping with the rest of the Wolfenstein franchise, as you could kick in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, although it was not good for much. You can also aim down sights with your weapons as well, and this is more necessary than you might otherwise think. Now, one must keep in mind that Wolfenstein 3D is very different from Doom, and so too is Brutal Wolfenstein to Brutal Doom. This is not just Brutal Doom with Wolfenstein trappings, and this game really does play rather differently from Brutal Doom in many respects. In Brutal Doom, you have enemies that shoot back with firearms, but ultimately you're going to be charging forward and ripping a tearing with wild abandon. Here, however, if you shout, "All glory to the first man to die," well, you will indeed be the first man to die, and a reload of the save will be in order. In Brutal Wolfenstein, all the enemies shoot back, meaning you need to take cover and be a bit more careful when fighting. With the enhancements that Brutal Doom makes to the accuracy, movement, and AI, the game feels a bit more challenging than base Brutal Doom. Other than shooting, the gameplay is FPS standard. You collect keys and find an exit. The levels for each episode of Brutal Wolfenstein have been entirely remade with new areas and new details. The music for Brutal Wolfenstein has also been remade, and it has been remade into a rather face-melting soundtrack. Have a listen. Many of the sound effects have been changed around as well, with many coming from Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Now, as you would expect from Wolfenstein, you'll be doing just one thing with all your guns, and that's killing Nazis! I'm going to assume that all the enemies that you fight are actually true believers, because only the most deluded fool would fight in a bright yellow uniform. All the old enemies return from base Wolfenstein 3D. You have the appallingly yellow uniformed basic guard, and in a nod to actual history, they are mostly armed with cars, and they can be dangerous due to this armament. Also, the game shouts out to Rise of the Triad. You can wound a basic trooper and he will beg you not to shoot him in the exact same pose as in Rise of the Triad. Fitting, since Rise of the Triad used the Wolfenstein 3D engine. And like in Rise of the Triad, if you turn your back on him, he will get right back up and shoot you in the back. Then you have the SS Smurf. He has an MP40 and good health. Then there is the officer. He is quick moving and does a ton of damage. Ever since I was a kid, I always thought he was saying biatch, biatch. But as it would turn out, according to one of my fans at least, he's saying spiatch or something along those lines, which is spy in German. Which I guess makes more sense, but not nearly as funny. The dogs make a return as well, and they are well trained in trying to chew your throat out. The mod also introduces a few new enemies. You have the new trooper, who is armed with the STG-44, a female trooper, that is a shout out to Return to Castle Wolfenstein, a Flammenwerfer trooper, that is way more dangerous than you might think, and last but not least, you have the Mutant Troopers. These make a return from the second episode of Wolfenstein 3D. But they have been fleshed out a bit. They now have helmets and different weapons, and you can blow them in half, but sometimes they won't die from that and keep attacking you. Cool and annoying, both. Another major difference from Doom is the fact that Wolfenstein 3D actually has boss fights. Doom does not really have boss fights. There are boss arenas, but you never face unique boss level enemies. At the end of E1, you face the Hell Barons, but then they show right up as regular enemies in the next episode. Then in E2, you fight the Cyber Demonio, but then he shows up as a semi-regular enemy in the next episode. Then you finally face the Spider Mastermind, but then it shows up as a regular enemy later as well. In Wolfenstein 3D, you face actual bosses, and then they never, ever show up again. And I happen to prefer this as it makes the bosses that much more memorable, and the boss fights in Brutal Wolfenstein are indeed memorable. Each episode of Brutal Wolfenstein, like in Wolfenstein 3D, is capped by a memorable boss fight. However, when you actually leave the level, there is one tiny issue in Brutal Wolfenstein. When you completed an episode in Wolfenstein 3D, the camera would pan out to show BJ running out of the building and he would shout, "Yeah!" Which was always so delightfully cheesy. Here, the level just ends. Which is not nearly as cool. The game has some pretty good graphical updates. The floor and ceilings are textured, and the levels feature destructible architecture. The enemy sprites are well detailed and have numerous animation frames, and the guns have been lavishly detailed and animated, and they all sound quite groin-grabbingly transcendent. We got guns, and it's time to review them. You start up the game with the Luger P08, and it looks good and has the sound from Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and is also extraordinarily well animated, like the Luger in Return to Castle Wolfenstein. It is almost immediately replaced with the Cars. That is also well animated and even includes animations for you reloading it with a stripper clip. And the game even gets its caliber right, 7.92 by 5.7 millimeter. It uses the sound effect from Return to Castle Wolfenstein as well, and it is a good go-to gun as it kills most enemies in one hit. That 8mm Mauser hits hard. Next, you have the MP40. It has good range and good damage and is useful for clearing out large numbers of enemies, and awesomely uses the Rise of the Triad MP40 sprite. And it is really just a backup for the one, the only, the greatest small arm of World War II, the STG-44. Yes, like with every World War II shooter out there, the STG-44 is the best weapon in the game. And really, the only reason you won't be using it is because you've either run out of bullets or you're close to running out. The developers for Brutal Wolfenstein felt that the handheld chain gun, that was the penultimate weapon in Wolfenstein 3D, was just a little too outlandish. So instead they gave you the Mg42 Machine Gun. This gun was slightly man-portable back in the day, although I'd hate to be the one to have to carry it. And in this game, it completely wrecks just about every single enemy and is very useful with bosses. In later episodes, you get access to the second greatest small arm of World War II, the M1 Garand. Ammo is scarce, but it does do good damage and uses sound effects from COD WA, and its in-block clip is quite well animated.
You can also get the Thompson submachine gun. This gun is decent enough, but once again, ammo is scarce. The sounds of the gun come from Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and ultimately, it's a decent gun if you don't have anything better. You can, of course, get the flamethrower, and it's just as fun as it sounds. Weirdly enough, you can find the Fallout 3 laser rifle, and one of the bosses is armed with it as well. As you would expect, the laser rifle is quite good at cutting down your foes. You can also pick up a boomstick, but I really never found myself using it all that much, as I prefer to stick with the SCG-44, MP40, and cars. The game also features grenades, and these can be very useful, especially in later episodes as the enemy count increases considerably, and some enemies can chuck grenades at you, but like in Medal of Honor on the PSX, half the time they just blow themselves up in a very hilarious manner.
And so that is Brutal Wolfenstein 3D, a mod I highly recommend playing. Even if you don't like Brutal Doom and feel that it's too cheesy or something along those lines, you probably will still like Wolfenstein 3D, as it is a very different game from Brutal Doom and Doom in general. And so, I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Brutal Doom, and good Project Brutality, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of Brutal Wolfenstein, please consider subscribing. If you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you more video game reviews.